Can you talk about Jesus and still get grant funding? Question I get a lot, I want to answer here in today's episode. Let's check it out. Well, welcome back to the Nonprofit Missionary Podcast. I'm Ken McWiller, and we are here to help small to mid-sized churches in being missionaries in their community by establishing faith-based nonprofits, getting grant funding, and focusing on long-term outreaches. So we wanted to just kind of share a little bit about what is this dichotomy of what's allowed and what's not allowed between being able to talk about Jesus and whatever. So I want to share my experience. Disclaimer, this is my experience. Things might be different depending on where you are. But before we get to that, quick update. We are officially a year old here at the coffee shop. Hooray. It's been really cool to kind of continue on this endeavor, and it's just been awesome. I really have loved doing what we do, and I feel like it's something that will continue to grow. I know that God has some great things planned here, so it's been great. I'm really excited about what the next few weeks will hold here at the coffee shop, as well as with our after-school program. So continue to just follow us on social media, TMPLC, the Tavern Coffee, wherever you might be on social media. Not really on X, but I think we still have a profile. I don't know, but whatever. With that said, let's get into a quick nonprofit tip. And this one is regarding social media. So I know sometimes it's really, really hard to post on social media and not get stuck into a social media loop, right? So I do social media for our coffee shop, for our after school program, for Nonprofit Missionary, and also for our church. So I do a lot of social media. There's been a few times where I was posting directly to Instagram or directly to Facebook, and I just kind of get caught in the vortex. I see a cool sports thing that looks really cool, so I have to go and check it out. Or I feel like I need to look at this news article, or someone's doing some kind of rando hot take. I have realized how hard it is to be active on social media without getting caught in the loop. Here's what I have found that can kind of work, and I want to encourage you to check it out. Might work, might not. Oh well. For me, what's worked is having a social media scheduling app. I've used some in the past. For example, TikTok has one that's built into their system on desktops. For me, it didn't work. It killed my viewership. But this one that I use is called Buffer. And you can have up to 3 social media channels on there at a time. So if you have Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, to kind of give a little bit of a peek of what I do for our nonprofits. I do all of my reels through Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok through the Buffer app. And then anything YouTube related, I just upload directly to there. That at least has kept me off of social media a little bit, so that when I'm here working, I'm not getting caught in the scrolling and everything like that. After hours and everything, that's usually pretty fine. But just as an encouragement, it is free for up to 3 channels. That's why I have 3. If you want, I think it's up to 20, you have to pay some monthly fee or whatever. So yeah, check that out. That might be a good help for you. So that's our nonprofit tip. Let's get into talking about Jesus, because I feel like some churches are very hesitant about launching into the faith-based nonprofit world because they're afraid that they have to compromise their faith. And I'm here to tell you, we've been getting grant funding for years. We talk about Jesus. On our website, the first value that we have is that we are unapologetically faith-based. We never shy away from that. Now, does that exclude some potential funders? Absolutely, it does. Some people will not give if you mention Jesus, period. But sometimes what a lot of grant makers will say, a lot of foundations will say, is that they do not give to religious organizations for religious purposes. What that means, and I feel like this is where a lot of churches kind of shy away from, like, oh, well, we can't go for that grant. What that specifically means is that they are not going to give a grant to a church for Sunday morning service or however they might do their services, or Bible study or something like that. So in other words, you can't get a $5,000 grant to preach on Sunday mornings, which most people that are looking for grants aren't looking for that. I would also argue that that includes, you cannot get grant funding for building renovations, especially for just your church. If you're using it for other purposes, that usually can be justified. But yeah, I think it's just important to know that it isn't just a church thing. Like, it's not, I think it's important to recognize that when it comes to the church area, funders don't want to give directly to a church. They'll give to a church for other purposes, but they won't just give to a church and say, use it for whatever you want. Now, when you're talking like state and federal grants, if you're giving to a church, more than likely it's going to be harder because of the separation of church and state. So getting grant funding to run stuff gets a little stickier and a little messy there. So in that regard, it might be harder. But if you're looking like, hey, we have an after-school program, can we talk about Jesus in it? Yes, you can. It's possible. We've done it. However, it's important to keep a few things in mind, because you can't just, you have to keep a few different parameters in place. Because foundations also, they are responsible for how they distribute funds. They're not just like handing out random blank checks to nonprofits that they like. They have certain guidelines that they have to go by based on their organizational bylaws, based on what the board of directors say, based on what their donors want. So, number one, you cannot make your nonprofit exclusively Christian, which, let's be honest, it shouldn't be anyway. Because if you're being an outreach to the community, if everyone in your nonprofit is 100% of faith-filled, spirit-filled person, then like, what are you doing? How is it an outreach? So, because a lot of them will say that you cannot exclude people based on their religious beliefs. And you shouldn't be doing that anyway. If a Muslim is coming into your church, your goal shouldn't be to kick them out, it should be to get them saved. If an atheist is walking through the doors of your nonprofit, you're going to want them to be saved, you're not going to want them to be out the door. So one of the restrictions that I would say, one of the boundaries that you should put in place is, if my organization is too Christian, then maybe I have to look at how I'm doing my outreach. Because your goal should be to grab people that aren't necessarily faith-filled, spirit-filled, and change their lives. Otherwise, it's not outreach, it's just another church service. So that's number one. Number two, I had mentioned this before, it can't go towards Sunday services. Grant funding is not allowed to be used to pay the pastor's salary, even in some cases to pay utilities. Depending on the grant, some grant makers do not allow you to use it for indirect costs, which would be like your rent or mortgage, I should say, light bills, power, gas, all that. And it definitely can't go towards just doing Sunday morning services. It's just not a good practice, and also most foundations won't allow that. Number three, you need a primary goal in order to have Jesus as your secondary goal. When I say that, I know people that are pastors, people that are in church, people that are saved are cringing. I'm not saying that we should put Jesus to the side. I'm saying on paper, your primary goal is whatever your nonprofit is doing, whether that's education, whether that's community development, whether that's mental health, whether that's physical health, whether that's food insecurity. That will still be your primary goal. According to the IRS, according to all of the foundations, your primary goal is whatever that top thing is. Whether that's a food bank, whether that's for us an after-school program. So technically, we are a 501c3 education organization that so happens to be Christian. Whereas a lot of people try to say we're a Christian organization that just so happens to do an after-school program. While in our hearts, that is true, in our minds and on paper, technically, that's how we have to kind of spin it. So it's important to just kind of have that mindset that your primary goal, according to ABC organization, not according to what you want to do, is to reach whatever social goal you're doing. And then through that, talk about Jesus all you want. Keep it as a part of your curriculum. Also, don't make it 100% mandatory, like everyone has to pray right now. Now, we do that. We say like everyone's praying, but like we can't force people to pray. Like you can't do that at your church anyway. But we always want to make sure that we're looking to try to build our community, and we're not trying to exclude anyone. Because another big thing that can get you in trouble is if they see any type of discrimination happening. They can see it as religious discrimination if you're saying, well, you're Muslim, you can't come to our program. You're atheist, you can't come to our program. You don't believe in the Assemblies of God tenets, you can't come to our program. In general, you should always be careful of that with employment stuff. I can get to an HR podcast at some point here, but especially when you're dealing with clientele, when you're dealing with whether it's low income, whether it's people with mental health issues, like whatever you may be doing, you always want to just be careful on how, if you have to disenroll people from your program, be careful of how and the why. Because you don't want to make the reason because they're not saved and they're coming against Jesus. That could end up biting you in a bunch of different ways. So, once again, long story short, if you want to talk about Jesus, yes, you can. I know of not just our organization, but several others that get grant funding, not just foundation grant funding, but also state and federal funding, and they still talk about Jesus. But you can't exclude people. You can't use the funding to fund your church, and you can't make it as a primary goal. And when I say fund the church, I mean like funding Sunday morning service. So don't be afraid of going after grant funding. I know sometimes it can be very challenging, and sometimes it can be very overwhelming. But don't exclude yourself, let them exclude you. In other words, keep applying for grants, go after something, and if they don't like you, if they don't like that you're faith-based, let them tell you, don't let yourself tell you that. Because I would hate for you to lose out on potential funding because you thought that they wouldn't fund you, but maybe they do. And sometimes those grant restrictions, they're there, but they're not like abided by that closely. Also, you can talk to someone too. If you ever have any questions on, you can say like, hey, we are a faith-based nonprofit. We do an after-school program, but we talk about Jesus. Would that be something that you guys would still fund? And sometimes they would ask some qualifying questions like, well, do you allow everyone, or like, and all that. So also, if you find someone that you're like, I'm not sure if they would fund me, but also I'm not sure if I'd want to get their funding anyway, then just don't get their funding. There's plenty of foundations out there. There's plenty of opportunities for you to be fully funded, not only to accomplish the mission of reaching the world for Jesus, but doing so in a way that doesn't make you feel yucky. So talk about Jesus. The whole point of what I do as nonprofit missionary, as a grant writer, isn't to just find grants for people. My goal is that people will use that funding to reach people that I would never be able to reach myself. My goal is for that funding to go and change lives in communities that desperately need a fresh breath of life. So please talk about Jesus. Please don't be shy about it. Do what you do. Even here at the coffee shop, every single day someone comes in and asks me, it's like, how did you guys start and everything? I always say this started from our church and we wanted to reach our community. And now that I'm thinking about it, being just over a year old, no one's ever gotten upset at me for saying that. No one's ever been like, oh, well, the church is awful, or, you never know what you're going to get from church people. They're all hateful and all that. Like, all the stuff that you hear about. I've never gotten it. That's not to say I won't. But people want to see a good thing happen in their community. And even those people that say that they hate Christians, that say that they don't like the church, if they see that a church is doing a good thing and is making an impact in the community, they will still do something to try to help further it. So keep that in mind, and yeah, let's continue to change this world for Jesus. So let's get into Confessions of a Missionary. And I don't know if I have a good one or not today. I want to talk newsletters. So newsletters to me are the best way to communicate. And I know for me, I make it a priority to do a newsletter every single month. I always schedule it around the end of the month, sometimes because of holidays or weekends, or I just ran out of time, I'll send it like the very beginning. But over the last 8 years, well, probably like 5 or 6 years, I've been very diligent about doing that. And there's a few reasons why I think it's important. Number one, it's really hard to personally connect with every single donor every single month. And also sometimes even if I were to like call or email, it takes a while to get back and forth. But number two, it gives a good framework of what's going on so that people can be praying, that people can keep giving, and just kind of keep people abreast of what's going on. I see it all the time with like any kind of construction. They always say your dollar's at work. So this is kind of like your dollar's at work. And so I've changed the way I've done newsletters several times over the years. I used to give like a kid update. I don't really do that anymore. Now I kind of focus more on like trying to be more educational about like why we're here and what we're doing and some of the nuances behind urban ministry that can be kind of challenging. And I feel like for me now, newsletters is a good way to not just keep people informed about what we're doing as a ministry. If people want to know more about what we do, we're on social media at least 3 times a week. We're putting out stuff. If there's ever like something urgent, we always send it out as many different ways as we can. So I try to make it more of like this is what is going on here. And this is why you being a part of this mission is so important. So I want to encourage pastors. First, please read the newsletters. I know sometimes, because I even see it too, like sometimes the newsletters can be a little dry. And I'll admit, sometimes there are months where I'm just trying to get it out. And I will or will not attach a video, and I'll have like a small blurb, whatever. But please read them. I know it takes time to put it together, to test to make sure everything went out. And then, of course, when you find out that 8 different things are not formatted right, then you have to go back and change it. It can be a lot. And it's also something, and I know it's important, which is why I'm always intentional about doing it, but it could be that hour, 2 hours that I may put into a newsletter could also be put towards other type of programming or other types of fundraising, things like that. So pastors, please read it. And number two, if you don't get a newsletter from someone that you're supporting, to me, that's a little bit of a red flag. Pastors, if you're supporting a missionary and not getting any communication from them, I would double check to make sure that they're still on the field. Because I've heard that there's been people that are off the mission field, but their missions account is still open and they're still getting missions funding, when that funding could be going to someone else who needs it. So if you're not getting regular communication, strongly consider not supporting that person. Or ask them like, hey, I haven't got your newsletter, like, do you send it out? Something like that. So, because communication is important. And I know like not everyone may do like the email newsletter or the snail mail newsletter. I still do snail mail for those that want it and need it. And some churches like to print it out and put it out there. I also do send it digitally. I also post it on my social. So there are plenty of ways that you can get the word out there. And it doesn't take like a full day, but it also does take some of your time. So pastors, please read it. And also, like missionaries, do newsletters. You may not have to do it monthly. Like I know there's a lot that do quarterly, but you gotta talk to your people. They've gotta know what's going on because they can't pray about something they don't know about. So that's all we got for today. I don't think I mentioned this. I mean, I like doing it here. I know like the audio might be a little echoey, but we're in a coffee shop. So thank you guys again for tuning in, and we will see you next week talking about something else. I don't know yet. God bless.